Hello, I'm Laurie Munch, a volunteer with the Funder Plus program at the Community Foundation for Surrey. And this is part two of our three-part series on charity accounting. And as we indicated in part one, there are 5 steps to producing compliant accounts for your charity. The first step is to set up a chart of accounts, which we covered in video 1. And in this video, we're going to be talking in more detail about allocating financial transactions to the categories in the chart of accounts. A little later on, we'll talk about separating unrestricted and restricted fund transactions. We'll talk about producing the statement of financial activities and preparing the financial part of the Charity Commission report. So in this video too, we're going to address practical steps for allocating financial transactions and the management of restricted and unrestricted funds. The first step, as we indicated in our earlier video, is to prepare a chart of accounts listing each type of financial transaction and allocating it to a code. And this usually requires an Excel spreadsheet or some accounting software. The bank statement is typically the starting point to identify receipts, in other words income, and payments, otherwise expenses. And for that, have a look at the next section. We use separate codes to allocate income according to the source of restricted fund grants. For example, if you've received money from the lottery and you've coded it LOT, or you've received funds from the Community Foundation for Surrey, coded CFS, and or unrestricted funds, donations, which you may well have coded DONU. If you're a village centre, then you can be specific about the type of income. For example, separating hall from cafe income and separating charity activities, for example, yoga, using restricted grants from running expenses, for example, INS for insurance, using unrestricted funds. Don't worry if this is a bit confusing. We'll pull it all together in a little while. It's crucially important to manage your unrestricted and your restricted funds separately. And that's to ensure compliance with donor stipulations and with the SORP regulations. Restricted income are funds granted for a designated purpose in accordance with your grant application and the grant letter that you've received and the funds you've received. And typically, those funds are applied to activities and projects, associated projects. If you have several restricted grants, more than likely, then each grant is applied and has been awarded for an activity, and it needs to be kept, in a sense, in its own silo, its own vertical in the context of an Excel spreadsheet. Wait a moment and this will be explained. Restricted funds cannot be mingled. Each restricted fund is in its own silo, and the contents of one silo from a restricted fund point of view can't be mixed with another silo. Unrestricted income is typically used for running costs, otherwise known as your core costs or your overheads. If you overspend one of those silos, one of those restricted fund silos, then unrestricted funds can also be used to top up that silo, because it can't be topped up from another silo. It's very important to keep a record of your year-end balances and the accounts that those balances refer to, whether they're restricted, and if they are restricted, which fund do they come from? And if they're unrestricted, they've got to be separated from restricted. And there's a separate video on the allocation of core costs, a couple of videos that we've produced on that. So looking at this in a pictorial form, and I'm just going to grab a wand so that we can go through this. Here we go, here's a red wand. We've got the statement of recommended practice right here. And you've built your chart of accounts. You may need some help from us or from your voluntary action group to produce that. But that's the start. It's always the start for how we put our accounts together. You have, and here's your Excel model or another spreadsheet, you have charitable activities as defined in your chart of accounts. So you may well have a mental health program, in which case you can code it MH. You may have a club for yoga, in which case you can code it YOGA. You may have a Friday club for teens, in which case let's code it FC. Now, in each of those instances, because it's a charitable activity, it will typically, not always, but typically be funded from restricted funds, from grants. So if the mental health program is being funded from CFS in accordance with your grant application and the grant award and the letter, then you will use a code called CFS for any expenses associated with the mental health program. In other words, your code will code mental health activities against the fund called CFS. And the same applies with the lottery, where we've used a code LOT. And if you've got some county council funds for your Friday club, the Teens Friday Club. Now your overheads, and we've got, as I mentioned, we've got 2 videos on the allocation of costs associated with governance or core costs or overheads. And these typically use unrestricted funds. For example, donations, which you might code in your chart of accounts, donations, DONU. If you've got trading income, the hall or the cafe, you might code those all. If you've got an expense on interest or utilities or telephone, you'd code it appropriately. I did mention a moment ago that the unrestricted funds are extremely valuable, because if your restricted funds in one of those silos get overspent, for example, if mental health gets overspent and you've run out of CFS funds, then the mental health, the balance of the costs in your mental health need to be picked up by unrestricted funds. That's why it's so important to monitor how much you've got left in your unrestricted funds. The combination of all of this results or leads to a statement of financial activities. That needs to go to an independent examiner under most circumstances and then be reported to the Charity Commission, the financial part of the Charity Commission. So again, we appreciate this has been a lot to take in. And again, we're going to pause here. But if this video has been useful, Please continue with video 3, which will pull the whole story together. We welcome your feedback on this video and any of our other videos, and you can see where you can complete a form. If you'd like more information about Funded Plus, then you can look us up on the web. And if you'd like to talk to us about Funded Plus support with your accounts or anything else, then do please contact us at that email address. I should emphasize, though, that in the first instance, it would be a good idea for you to talk to your local voluntary group organization, voluntary action organization, and they may well have somebody who can assist you. This video is for general guidance and does not replace the need for professional advice in relation to your specific circumstances.